Now that we have created the class, let us go run this class. Like I have to run this class to create the tables and all those things, and I have to use Hibernate to create the tables. So let us go back to the package and let us create a new class. Let's call it test employee. Test employee, and let it have the public static void main method. So in the test employee class, the first thing we have to do is to call Hibernate. We have to use something called as the annotation configuration. We have to call a class called annotation configuration from Hibernate. This is something you have to remember. Annotation. You can just put annot and control space annotation configuration. You can see this annotation configuration. Let's give it like a object name config equal to new annotation configuration. Control space new annotation configuration. Okay. Now to this configuration class, there is a method called add annotated classes. Now what this method is, if we have classes in our project which are annotated with this entity, that is, these are all annotated classes, the classes in our project which are annotated. So we need to add this particular classes. How many other classes we have to add it. So we have one class called employee.java. So we are going to add that particular class employee.class. Remember, it is employee.class. Okay. So that means we are telling Hibernate, hey, we have a class called employee.class. We want you to take care. So that's config.add annotated class employee.class. The next line is config.configure. Now what does this config.configure line do? Now config.configure line, what it does is, if you have this hibernate.cfg.xml file, this is the line which reads this configuration file. It reads this configuration file and it understands. Hibernate reads this configuration file and understands, okay, what is the name of the connection driver class, and where is the driver located, the URL, and what is the username and password of that particular database, and what is the database name, and what is the dialect for it, and all those things. So this particular line of code, config.configure, reads that particular configuration file hibernate.cfg.xml and understands, okay, fine, I have to, this is the database and this is the username and password. Now suppose if your file name is hibernate.cfg.xml, you don't have to do anything here. This is more than enough. You can go back and you can go ahead and code, but some people will tend to explicitly write their configuration file names. So we can do that. It is not required, but then you can always write it so that you can know which configuration file is it reading. Hibernate.cfg.xml. This is not required, but then because by default it will take this particular file hibernate.cfg.xml, and remember it has to be in this file is in the source, that is, you have to paste it in the source folder. The hibernate.cfg and log4j.properties should be in the source folder. So once you have mentioned it, let's save it. Now okay, it has read this file and it has configured itself. Now the next step is this. We have something called as, now we have to make Hibernate create those tables. To create the tables, we have to call something called as a schema export. You have to remember this once again. You just put SCHEM control space new schema export, and to this schema export you have to pass this config object, and then you have to call something called as a create method. The create method comes with two Boolean statements. that is Boolean script and Boolean export. Now what is this Boolean script? What is the first Boolean statement? Now the first Boolean statement, I'm going to put it as true. That means now whatever SQL the Hibernate is going to generate. Now the advantage of Hibernate is we don't have to write SQL statements. Hibernate is going to create SQL statements to write to the database. So whatever SQL statements Hibernate is going to create, let it be printed to the log file. That's what we are saying, like, okay, let it write to the log file so that we can see what the SQL statements are. So the first statement is true. Now export, what is this one? This is also a Boolean. I'm going to give it true. Now this is the statement. The second true says that, okay, whatever the SQL statements that you create, I want it to be written to the database. That is, I want you to execute this to the database. So that is the second statement. Now why would anyone create SQL statements printed to the log file but put this as false, don't execute to the database? We will see scenarios later on about that. Let us not worry about it. For now, this is new schema export, pass the config object and then call the create method and pass the two true statements. Now save it, Control S, and let us now run this particular test employee method. Now right click, click on run Java application. You can see that the console is printing something and some gibberish is going on. Now you can see that it has done something, create table. This is the SQL statement it printed out. So it has actually created a table called employee in the database. So let us go and verify it. We can go to the database development perspective, and over here in the Hibernate DB we can go to schemas. By default in Derby it will create our tables in the user schema. You can click on user, you can click on tables, and wow, we got our employee table. So it took the name of the class as the table name, all uppercase, and it will take these particular data as columns. To check this particular table, just right click, click on data and click on sample contents. You should be able to see the results right here. See, it has two columns, employee ID and employee name. We will see later on how to change the table name and column name and all those things, but congratulations, we have created a table out of a class.